Testing, testing. I'm just going to test this for a second before I actually go live. So we'll figure this out. Is it working? Okay, it sounds to be fine. Now let's get me to play this video. Let's see, how do I play this video?
That you actually hear, how are students doing? One of our parent leaders was actually hear, how are students doing?
Okie doke. Okay, so it is August. Kids are going back to school. I do need to do a life after teaching update for you guys. I hope you guys can't hear my fan too much. It is hot. In California, it's really hot right now. But I wanted to do this video, and I wanted to respond to this video on how students in Oakland are getting A's, but they cannot read. And I wanted to, California Insider is an interesting channel. They talk about a ton of issues in education and California in general. And they just kind of like open the door and remove the the blindfold from people's eyes about what's really happening. And since I was a teacher and a lot of this hits close to home, I thought I would review. You guys kind of like my teacher things content that tends to get a lot of views, ironically. Let me shut the door. So we're going to watch this video and I'm going to react while I fold some laundry. So you will not see my face, but I have a ton of videos that I've pre-recorded for you guys that are coming on next week. By the way, guys, my channel just got like first step monetized, which I'm really excited about. I'm so thankful. It's been a long road, mostly because I don't have all the time in the world to post. And so it took a little bit longer than I wanted to get my channel monetized. But it's been fun. So let's get started. Oakland students can't read, but they are getting A's. And we're going to talk about it because it's a hot mess. Okay.
Went to university.
When I go to a board meeting, it is so rare that you actually hear, how are students doing? One of our parent leaders was at those meetings and she said, she got really emotional because she said, when are people going to shut down the meeting for my kids? You know, for kids that look like my son, you know, my black son.
My guest today is Kimmy Kinn, who has had decades of experience working in the Oakland school system as a teacher, principal, and superintendent. Today, she'll share with us some of the problems she's witnessed in California's public school system, including grade inflation, mismanagement of funds, and lack of focus on kids' academic achievements. In the past decade, the cost per student dramatically increased in California, going from $10,000 per student per year to now over $23,000 per student per year.
Okay, you guys. So one thing my issue with government in general is that oftentimes people in government who are placed in certain sects of government have never had any experience in those areas. And a lot of school boards are the same way. There are people who have not been principals, there are people who have not been teachers, there are people who are politicians. That's their job, is to be a politician. It's not to necessarily care about the student's success. So this does not shock me one bit that the school board does not care about the progress of that woman's child. The other thing I wanted to mention is something that I learned in teaching school that actually like shocked me. Our teacher, one of our professors said, hey guys, raise your hand if you think we need more funding. And everybody raised their hand. And he goes, what if I told you that California has one of the highest fundings in California? And this was back in, gosh, I don't know when this was, 2015. And one of the states that has the most funding. And he said, you guys know that we keep increasing funding, but student progress doesn't get better. And that is when it really opened my eyes to the fact that we oftentimes think that if we pour money into something, it's going to fix it. As if money fixes problems. And that's ironic because I mean, that's sort of like a political ideology, right? That if people just have more money, then they'll behave better. If people just have more money, then they'll respond better. Like, yes, to a degree, resources matter. They do. But if we're spending at the high end of student support and we're still not seeing different results, that means something else is going on, right? And that something else is often means that teachers are not seeing that money and students are not seeing that money, right? There's corruption, as they're going to talk about.
Yet the proficiency rates have not improved much. We also talked to Charles Cole, who has attended 11 public schools growing up in the Bay Area. He was facing homelessness and is advocating for the kids in public schools.
Based on how many kids read at grade level, looking at third grade reading data, determine how many prison beds they're going to need to build. Because there's such a strong correlation between early reading and what happens later in life with student success.
I'm Siama Korami. Welcome to California Insider. Kimmy, it's great to have you on. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We are very excited to talk to you about education because this has been a big topic for us at California Insider. Californians, we care about education.
Yep.
Everything that comes on the ballot, people vote for it.
Mm-hmm.
We want to give funding to education.
Yeah, he's being facetious right here. We care about education. No, we like to throw our money at things and use that as a marker of how much we care about something. And there's all this this discourse around, you can't just throw money at things, but that's exactly what we do in California. We go, I voted for the people who are going to give money to students. And it's like, well, clearly money is not working, right? In California, that's something that we do. We have exorbitant taxes and exorbitant money and exorbitant donations to schools and exorbitant funding in education, and nothing has changed. So he's being facetious here. He knows what's really going on. But I think this just goes to show you the delusion that we have in the state of California, that we think that we aren't actually looking at the outcomes of how we're voting and looking at the outcomes of how we're spending money and just saying, okay, well, we money is the problem. Oh, the kids are just poor. They're just poor. So we just give them more money and it'll fix all their problems. No.
But there's a big discrepancy
Mm-hmm.
between what's happening in the schools
Mm-hmm.
and the results we're getting out of schools and the amount of heart and effort we put into it. As a society here in California. You have been an educator in Oakland
Mm-hmm.
for many years, and you've been through the education system from being a teacher to being a principal and superintendent. Can you tell us more about why is this discrepancy and what's going on with education first in Oakland?
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks for the great question. And we agree with you. In Oakland, what's been happening, why we founded our organization is we have incredible discrepancy between students who are more affluent or students who are white and Asian versus students who are low income or happen to be Latino or Black. And we are really fighting for figuring out how do we close that gap. So currently, about 2 in 10 of our Black and Brown students are reading at grade level across the city of Oakland, and it's about 1 in 10 in math. So it makes me so nervous because I think, what are all the careers out there? How are you successful in college or career if you can't bring your proficiency up to grade level? And we're putting our students at a huge disadvantage, for their life opportunity.
This is absolutely 100% correct. And in fact, it's not just knowing math. It's not just the fact of being able to do math. It's actually the critical thinking that is required as you move up in math skills. Like I've said this before, kids don't need to know geometry. They need to know how to think differently. That's why geometry exists, right? Unless they're going to be a math major. I mean, I've used geometry in my home for design or whatever, figuring some things out. But bottom line is, real world, you're not going to be using geometry every single day, but what you are doing is you're stretching your brain and you're learning how to think about things differently, right? Same thing goes with reading. You need to be able to decode information. And it is quite the shame that we are still, here we are in 2024 and 1 out of 10 kids and 2 out of 10 kids can't read. That's a disaster.
communities. Meanwhile, there's about a 40% gap with white and Asian students, and we got to figure that out. We can't.
Okay, by the way, a 40% gap is also atrocious. Like, can we just be honest? Like, so let's just say that like Black and brown kids are at 10%. That means that 50% of the white and Asian kids also are struggling. So this is a system across the board. And I think this is like the danger of this rhetoric particularly is like, okay, well, they're just doing better. So they're doing better. So they're doing better. Let's put them over here versus actually this entire system as a whole, 50% is garbage. Like, we want to be up to about 75% because that means that the majority of the students, we're at average, right? 70%. So, yeah, that's also deplorable. Like that number of 50% of Asian and white students are reading at grade level is deplorable.
Can't be leaving entire groups of students behind. When I go to a board meeting, it is so rare that you actually hear how are students doing in terms of their academic outcomes. And this is really confusing to me, and it's confusing to a lot of people because the whole point of a school district is to focus on educational outcomes. So they might be talking about contracts, or they might be talking about different policies, but what they're not doing is setting really clear goals to change that gap, to really bring kids up to grade level, and then monitoring it. And any leader knows you got to be clear about your goals, and then you have to come back and check the progress so you're on track, or if you need to make adjustments.
I will tell you guys that something that's interesting that happens in schools, because I've worked in schools that have been like quote unquote taken over by the state, as well as schools that are higher academic, right? And the schools that have higher academic achievement, they actually do this really well, but that's not a result of, like, the academic achievement is not a result of them tracking. The academic achievement is a result of what's going on at home. What I will say about the other schools, because you guys know I've been in low-income schools, I've been in schools where kids, 20% of the kids are at grade level. What's happening is that we have so many other issues that tracking data is very difficult. It's so difficult. I mean, we would have meetings where we would start to track data, and then we would get off, like some other thing would happen, and we would never see that data again. So it is challenging. I have a solution for this, but I'm curious what she thinks actually is the solution, what the solution is. But I do have a solution for this as someone who's actually worked in schools.
And this is what we see needs to happen. Our board needs to get focused.
So what you're saying is the school board is actually not paying enough attention to the academic achievement of schools.
100%. 100%. I mean, a lot of boards and councils across the country have been facing a lot of protests and people really concerned about global foreign policies. And these issues are important, don't get me wrong. They're incredibly tragic things happening all over the world, but it's not the business of a school board.
Correct. And this is so, like, she's so spot on. We love the pomp and circumstance and the gratification and the feeling of moral righteousness and justice that I've talked about this topic that is global. Meanwhile, our children are living in a proverbial war zone themselves, because the minute they leave high school, they have no options for life. So where's the real crisis, right? Like, she's 100% correct.
And it really diverts the focus from education and from closing some of these proficiency gaps that our school board has to deal with.
So like when they were planning to vote for Israel and Palestine resolution, and
that shut down several board meetings. And I remember one of our parent leaders was at those meetings, and she said she got really emotional because she said, when are people going to shut down the meeting for my kids? For kids that look like my son, my Black son.
And here's the thing. I can tell you what those school boards look like, you guys. I can tell you exactly what they look like. They do not look like the people who are in those districts, right? The school board is run by so in Oakland Unified is Oakland Unified, right? There are schools that are higher end in Oakland Unified and lower end. And so they're they're more concerned with what do I look like politically if I don't say anything about this than the Black children that are in Oakland. They are more concerned about that. And this is where, like, ugh, okay. As this woman said, as Kimmy said, those are important, but we have homegrown issues that are more important. And this is why the United States is so funny to me, because they would rather deal with everybody else's issues than ensure that Black kids get support. And this is across the board. This is from the left all the way to the right. It is rampant. It is very evident because Oakland's a very left-leaning city. It's very leftist. They would rather deal with making sure they have save political face than deal with Black issues. That is a fact. And that's why it's disgusting, if you guys want my honest opinion, when these things happen, because they will throw in your face, oh, we care about you. We want you guys to succeed. But this is what happens. In this board meeting, this woman's like, oh, nobody's shutting things down for my Black son, but they'll shut him down for something that's happening across the ocean so that they can make sure that they save face. Are you kidding me right now? We have a crisis in the United States. We have a crisis right now. It's problematic.
While these issues are important, they're just not the work of the school board.
So do you think the fact that the boards are not focusing enough on the education, on the academic achievement, do you think that's trickling down to the schools? How does it manifest in the education system?
Absolutely. In any organization, in any business, right, you're only as good as your leader. So we work from the grassroots up, but also from the top down. And both of those, we need to be working in alignment, right, at all those different levels. It's very hard. It's very hard to move student achievement, right? But if we're not focused at each level, including the school board, it's not going to happen.
How does it impact the teachers?
They're all over the place. And so they need their principal to help them be focused. The principals need their supervisors to help them be focused, and up the ring. And then at the end of the day, we really believe the families, that's the most important accountability that's missing in the system, is that our schools are accountable to the families that they serve.
Yeah. And what you doing, buddy? And this is tough because a lot of teachers who come into, like, say, an Oakland school district are first-year teachers, or they're teachers who are not in the business of changing lives, or they're well-intentioned, but they don't have the training to actually know how to do that, because even teacher training school, you guys, has not prepared teachers for how to teach kids how to read, how to teach basic math. They're relying on a textbook, which, by the way, you guys, like, the state of California is not invested in phonics. The state of California is not invested in basic math. They're invested in Common Core curriculum, which, in my opinion, has served us very poorly. It sounds great in theory. It sounds great. Oh, we're going to do higher level thinking. First graders should not be doing higher level thinking. Their brains are set up for rote memorization. That is the time where you pump them with so much information that they can retain. And then you send them off to fourth grade. By the time they get to fourth grade, then they can start to use their reasoning skills. And it's great. That has worked for decades. But somewhere along the line, someone who is not in education, someone who is not interested in, doesn't understand childhood development, decided that children should be trying to do this sort of abstract thinking at 9 years old. Can some kids do it? Yeah, or sorry, at 7 years old. Can some kids do it? Yes. Is that the best way to make sure information is disseminated? No. And you guys, I've said this before, but let me tell you what the white and Asian kids are doing. They're going to Russian School of Math. Do you know what they're doing in Russian School of Math? Old school math. Old school reading. They're going to Kumon and they're doing basic reading. This is what's happening. And if I were a principal of a school, if I was the lead of a group, I would 100% say, screw the curriculum. We're going back to basic phonics. We're going back to basic math. And we're going to do some mindset work for kids, because that matters too. That's another thing that we should be teaching at that level, is mindset, resiliency training. That's a big deal. That's what some of the most successful schools are doing. At that level, that's what you're training, right? And when I say, like, fundamental skills that you need, like, for the rest of your life, that's really important. But they're not doing that in Oakland. They're following the regular sort of like Common Core curriculum, which is trash, in my opinion. I've seen it. And I taught fourth grade, which is like a reading one of the levels grades where you're reading, yeah, I'm against it.
Did the parents know that the students are behind?
No, not enough. We think that gap, we think parents have a right to know. That's one of our values. The parents must know. They must understand their child's progress, what grade level looks like. Like every parent should know, my kid's in second grade, this is where they need to be by the end of second grade. And then they need to know how to partner with their teacher and also with their student, right? To be reading at home and doing other things to be partners in that progress. But this is what we're finding as we work. We're working with 10 different schools. We've trained about 600 parents in Oakland how to work with their kids, how to get involved and advocate for their children's education. And very commonly, what we find is parents are shocked about the data because they really just haven't seen it. And even if they have seen the data, they didn't fully understand what it meant.
And a lot of what's happening to you guys is that these parents, these teachers are passing kids, and she's going to talk about this. So if their kids are getting good grades, then parents are going to say fine because they don't know to dissect the data, right? So they're saying, oh, my kid's fine. The teachers are saying, oh, your kid's fine. They passed. So parents are like, great, they're at grade level. They're doing okay. And these parents are busy parents, right? Like they have other things going on in their lives. And yes, it is their job to monitor their children. But if a teacher tells you and you don't know any better, oh, your kid's fine, you're going to think your kid's fine. There's no really way around it. And because these teachers are passing kids without really expecting them to achieve at grade level, this is what you get.
One of the things that comes to mind, do the parents you talk to, do they actually not have enough time? Or why do you think they're not as engaged in the school? Is it time? Is it not knowing what to do?
Yeah.
Is it a lot of trust in the school system?
I think it really starts with trust and relationship. If you yourself did not have a good experience in public education, the minute you set foot into your kid's school, you might feel a little apprehensive, right? Because you're remembering maybe some of the experiences you've had. We find through our work with families that is overwhelmingly the case. One parent told us just a couple weeks ago, she said one of her teachers when she was in school told her, I get paid whether you learn or not.
Wow.
That's so debilitating to a student, right? Her own self-esteem, her own, vision of herself as a learner, to have a teacher say something like that. And that's, that doesn't happen every day, but that's the kind of thing that she's now a mom and she has an elementary school student. She's thinking about that when she goes into her kid's school. So in schools, we have to create the kind of trust and relationships where families feel welcomed and they feel warmly respected, right? But we say it can't stop there. Families have to understand the academic stakes, right? If you get behind in kinder, in first and second grade, in third grade, the prison system is basically measuring based on how many kids read at grade level, the prisons in third grade, looking at third grade reading data, determine how many prison beds they're going to need to build.
Yeah, and that's, this is a stat that we heard when I was in teaching school, right? That if you can't, by third grade, if you can't read at grade level, then we're building prisons for you. Now, my question is to this woman, in all of her, I'm sure she has a good heart. Why is it then that you're not focused on K1 and 2? Because if I'm looking at the data says, hey, you need to be able to read before third grade, like properly, then you should be spending all of your effort on the incoming K first and second graders and working on those parents. Because truth be told, it's going to be tough with like the upcoming, maybe you can hit the third graders too, who are already there. But you need to hit K1 and 2 parents and say, this is what you need to do by third grade. Like this is what you need to do to be successful. And teachers need to refocus their curriculum on those things, on actually teaching students how to read.
Because there's such a strong correlation between early reading and what happens later in life with student success. So if we know that, don't we have to do everything we can to make sure our kids are reading at grade level by third grade?
And you mentioned that the boards are not really paying a lot of attention to this. So are they looking at that?
Well, I'm really excited. So in Oakland, we have two board members, Dr. Thompson and Director Lerma, have introduced a resolution to pass this policy that will set very clear goals to double the proficiency in math, to double the proficiency in reading, and then also to make sure not 50% of Black and Brown students are eligible to apply to college, but 80% would be the goal that they want to put forward. So they're introducing this resolution to their colleagues and really helping their colleagues understand that part of making change is we got to look in the mirror and we got to think, how do we exercise as board members our agency to impact things that are just that important, like the students reading on grade level.
Now, Kimmy, what about the other ones, the whites and Asians and others? How are they doing better than the Black and Browns? Is it because of the family, or what's the reason?
We find,
let's see if she could be honest.
If your parents graduated from high school or went to college, you are much more likely to graduate from high school and go to college. But what we know is many of our Black and Brown parents, even themselves, didn't get access to a great education. And that pattern persists. The proficiencies, the gaps are huge. They are huge.
So the proficiencies, the gap is that big. Why is that? It's like, where do you think is the root of that? Is it they're going to the same class, right?
Yeah.
Is it the different schools?
There's a lot of correlation. If you put our proficiency, one thing that we did to really motivate the parents was show them, if you map out the schools in the city, just geographically on a map, you can see more of almost all the schools that are green schools where there's a lot of proficiency. They're in the higher income areas of the city.
So the low income schools are not doing well.
That's right.
They're doing really bad then.
So you tend to have newer teachers, right? Less prepared, less experienced, more going on in the community that are needs, that distracts you and that requires more attention. And so it's not that it can't happen. I mean, I certainly was part of a school in a very underserved community. We dealt with a lot of issues going on around the school.
Okay, so I don't think she's going to say it, but there is a cultural difference that we don't really want to talk about, especially as it relates to Black and Brown families. There is a cultural difference. University, like being successful in school, is not a priority. And I think where people are afraid to say this because I think it make people think that it means that you're a bad person or you're a bad parent. But until you internally truthfully believe that your child is capable of succeeding and capable of learning, then you're not willing to do anything and everything it takes. And so what I've learned is that you have to convince the parents also that this is something worth fighting for, that this is something that's worth change. Like if you project their life out, this is what the possibilities are for them. And it's not just about going to college. It's just about living, like being proficient and having opportunities. Someone who is well-spoken, who understands how to argue, who understands basic math, could go into sales and be a millionaire. Like that is a fact, right? That's a fact. That doesn't require, going into sales doesn't require a college degree at all. It doesn't require a college degree. It's just about learning how to do hard things, learning the skills like reading, having the cultural context of literature, understanding how to develop and form an argument, understanding how the world works. All this stuff you actually learn in school. I know people like to say you don't, but you do. You learn how to deal with certain teachers. You learn how to deal with certain personalities. And then eventually, if you decide you want to go to school, great. Go to school. If you decide you don't want to, you're still smart enough, you're intelligent enough to have this, to work your way up in a company or to start your own business, right? You have this wherewithal to do that. And unfortunately, with a lot of Black families, because I'm Black, I'll speak for myself, this belief that your child can actually succeed and is minimal, is very small. We have been trained, I'm not going to talk about by whom, but we have been trained to believe socially and culturally that the only way to succeed for Black people is through sports. Everything else is kind of, that's for those people over there. That's for a certain kind of Black person. That's kind of for a certain kind of person. And I think what's missing, particularly in Oakland, is people giving examples of normal, regular Black kids from Black neighborhoods with Black backgrounds doing extraordinary things. This has to be an example that is set for a family, and then it is set for children. Because what I firmly believe is, yes, I think parents should be involved, but what I've seen with my own students is the ones that really, really want to succeed, they have this internal drive, and then they're hungry. And that burden is not on their parents. Now, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's the case. My parents have 8 children. Like, I could not imagine my mom, and a lot of these families are the similar, right? They got 4, 5, 6 kids. They got nieces and nephews living with them. It's a lot of people to manage. At some point, I had to just be motivated on my own. And there were a lot of teachers who motivated me. There were a lot of, I had my siblings to motivate me, but these kids need a motivation that is, that may come with support from their parents and that may not. And that is very, very difficult. And I don't think, she won't say it because I think it's politically incorrect, right? It's not politically correct to say that, hey, these families have cultural differences, but they do. Like, culturally, Indian and Asian families go to college. Culturally, that's on the whole. Now, somebody's going to say, not all. I know some Asian and some Indian who didn't. But on the whole, like, in general, Asians and Indian families, they promote college as part of their culture. They promote education. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, they have their own culture, whereas in Black America, we were stripped and then sold a culture, and we've sort of taken on that culture of degeneracy, we've taken on a culture of lack of intellect, we've taken on a culture of anti-intellectualism, and so we wear that as a badge of honor. Now, we'll have to change that, and I don't know that the school system will be able to do that, but I do think the school system can support those students by providing them with opportunities to see other people like them become successful and to provide them with that motivation.
But you have to figure it out. That's not an excuse not to do well. We have to provide the supports to make sure all kids get up to the goal.
Now, do you have any examples from when you were a teacher and principal? Were you guys able to help these kids achieve? And what was it like? Do you have any examples of things that almost look impossible?
Absolutely. I remember a student with really severe disabilities who came into our school in kindergarten. His doctor said, look, he's just really not going to be able to learn very much. We're just going to integrate him so he can have a good experience in school. We partnered as a team. We worked so closely with that family as we worked with the medical staff that he had. That kid soared. He was reading on grade level by first grade. He astounded everybody. And
this is correct. I've had a student similar where they were like, oh, he's a special, he's RSP, as we used to call it. And oh, he's kind of, and I was like, no, we don't do that here. Like, we don't, no, we're not doing that. Even if he is RSP, we're going to put him to the highest corner, to where he almost is not. Okay, we're going to get him to that level, but that's not normal and that's not natural, and it takes an extraordinary effort. And if the whole school is not on board, things like this just don't happen. This is almost unheard of, to be honest, in California, because it takes an extraordinary effort. And most people think like what the doctor said, oh, he's just going to be, you won't believe the amount of times, oh, he's just going to be like this. This is just who he is. Oh, they won't be successful. They have this, whatever. And it's simply not true. It's simply not true, but it does take an extraordinary effort to make a change like this. And most schools are not willing to do it. And quite frankly, teachers are burnt out and not paid enough to.
That was a case where we know we can make a difference. When we get focused, when we focus in on what a student needs, that team of adults can really make it happen.
There is a phenomenon that we're hearing that some of the grades that kids are getting, they cannot be trusted. Is that common in the school system now?
This is a national issue right now that's really being flagged in the national media. Parents across our country overestimate how well their kids are doing in school. This tells us something is broken within our education system in the way that we're communicating with parents. We can have kids be straight A students, complete their A through G requirements. They get to college and all of their classes are remedial.
But wait a minute, why did she say they're overestimating their? I didn't like this part at all, because I'm like, no, you guys are handing out grades that children did not deserve. She's like, the parents are overestimating their child's success. Well, what is a parent to think if their child is receiving A's? And historically, A's have been proved or something where you're doing well in school. Don't blame this on the parents now. This is a school system problem where you guys are, there's an intense grade inflation where you guys are giving A's to students who don't deserve them, and then going, oh, but the parents are overestimating. No, the parents are reading what's on the report card. And if no one's telling them, hey, this report card's inaccurate, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And this is also ties back to the issue formally where she's like, the parents are shocked. Well, yes, baby, because your teachers in the Oakland Unified School District are being dishonest. They're not telling the truth about what the issue is. They're not telling the truth about how well or how poorly the students are doing. Don't blame the parents. This is your fault.
Because when they take the college placement tests, they are not at a college level. So this is happening constantly. And it's actually one of the reasons that first generation kids, low income kids of color who get to college don't stay in college because it's so detrimental, embarrassing, shameful. I felt that when I got to college and I couldn't do the work. It's such an assault kind of on your self-esteem when you get there and you can't even write an essay that is a passing essay in your English class, right, at a college level. So we have this huge disconnect between these grades that are getting sent home and the actual proficiency level.
Folks, you've probably been hearing me talk about Verify for a while. If you ever need your folks,
That's why we're really a fan. Some schools and school systems, they very clearly communicate, here's the reading assessment. The reading assessment showed your kid is here, the grade level is here, here's how we're going to move your kid up. Here's how we're going to work together. But that's why parents have to understand the data, not just the teachers. Oh, your kid's so nice. They're working so hard, got a B. What does that B mean? Right? Is that B based on an assessment?
Is that B a really C or a D, or is
Correct.
it a B?
Well, and this is the issue. It's like she won't say it. She's trying, this is what bothers me about the bureaucrats, so to speak, is she won't say it. There would be no issue if you said D means they are not at grade level, F means they're not at grade level, C, because that's a normal grading pattern. If I give you a B, that means you are above average. That means you should be at grade level. But she won't say this, and it's actually it's infuriating to me. Because she keeps saying, well, we have to it's okay. In essence, what she's saying is it's okay to give them A's and B's if they don't deserve it, but we just have to explain to the parents that doesn't mean, no, baby, that's the point of grades. The point of grades is that they actually give you a clear understanding of where your child is. Unless y'all are going to have a whole meeting with parents and say, hey, by the way, grading systems don't matter. They're just there to for whatever reason, but here's the real truth. Then get rid of grades. Do you know what I mean? It's odd.
B.
That's right.
As a real B.
That's right. In fact, since it's such a systemic problem, we need to really rethink grades to make sure that the real and correct information is getting to parents and students, because once they know the reality, they're motivated
They're
to
going to
act.
do better. They have to do
Yes.
better. So idea is that right now, some of the schools might be giving A's and B's to students that might be C's and D's.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. I have people on my team who will tell me that's exactly what happened to them. They went to school in Oakland. They graduated, top of their class, went to college, remedial English, remedial math. My one, you take the class over and over and over again until you can actually pass it. We shouldn't put kids through that, because for our most vulnerable kids, that means they're just going to quit, right? Because they don't want to keep taking that class over and over. They want to go to the college level class. And it's embarrassing, right? To get to college and not be at the grade level that is required for you to be successful. Charles, he and I got together. We were part of the founding team of Families in Action. And in the first year and a half, he and I got in front of about 2,000 high school students to talk to them about college eligibility and to actually share the data for Black and brown students that just about under 50% were eligible to apply to a college. And kids, their minds were blown. They said, we had no idea. How come nobody told us this? I got to go talk to my cousin who goes to this other school where they have really low A through G rate. I got to tell him and make sure he's getting into the right classes so that he won't be left out of being able to apply to college. Charles has a great story for himself about how he was able to complete A through G, but his cousin wasn't. And his cousin ended up going into the military and served 3 tours in Iraq, right? These are life and death decisions for our kids, whether they're actually able to apply and go to college, right?
And you guys have to know that this is actually school counselors' decision. Now, the question is, do they actually have school counselors, right? Because school counselors are supposed to be going through these things. But if their school counselors were anything like mine, they looked at them and said, oh, Black kid probably doesn't need A through G. They're just going to be on the street. They're going to be pregnant by 16. It's going to be a drug dealer. Don't care. That's the reality. That's what she's not saying.
And we had a chance to talk to Charles, which we're going to share.
My parents were addicts. Went to about 11 elementary schools. Grew up homeless. Lived in 2 shelters in San Francisco, to in Oakland. And education really was the refuge. It was like, that was the thing that was going to get me, out of poverty. And it's something that when you go to that many schools, you start to notice differences and you notice things. And I didn't go to the best schools. So when I became an adult and I got to see more and more schools, it became an easy career for me to pursue just by having a lot of different experiences. But I know that, I come from people that have a high level of agency where you got to make things happen. And even when the system isn't doing what it needs to do, you got to push on that system while at the same time having plans A, B, and C. And so that's a little bit about me.
What is the issues that the system has, the education system has, that you see based on your experience?
Yeah, I think I have a ton. I think that when you can predict with a certain level of accuracy how well in life somebody is going to do education-wise by how much money they make, I think that is a sign of a rigged system. I think that if you don't know how to navigate this education system and take everything that you need from it, you're not going to get the things that you necessarily deserve. And so the system is inadequate in that the level of quality that young people that may be born in poverty, immigrants, whatever the case is, they're not getting, what they deserve. They're not getting the very best. And I think that's a big problem. And so, listen, man, any system where you can look at 3rd grade reading levels and then predict how many prisons need to be built, I would say that system has some flaws.
Okay, this is where I disagree with him. That doesn't make the system flawed. Oh my gosh, this is kind of the issue with being like, you can't blame the data for being the data. The data is that if you cannot, it makes sense. If you cannot read at the 3rd grade level by the time you're in 3rd grade, and that means that something's not happening in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, but that doesn't mean that the system is broken because of that data, right? Like that correlation is going to be made regardless. That correlation has to be made because that's what happens. But that's not. I don't know if this is making sense what I'm saying. I don't think that because the data is correct, like that correlation is correct, that there's something wrong. The correlation itself is not the issue. It's the fact that we can even make that this is even a thing, meaning the fact that we have not worked out how to increase the reading level and to make sure that kids are actually ready and prepared for 4th grade and 3rd grade. That's the problem, because they're going to get the correlation from somewhere. They're going to get that correlation from somewhere. You're not going to go change every system. They have to have a correlation. They have to have a predictor. That's just part of life. You have to have a predictor. But how about the goal be that we make that statistic very small? You know what I mean? Not, oh, well, the system is wrong because of this. Now, are there things wrong with the system? Yes. But it's not the fact that you can make a correlation between reading level and prison. That's not the issue.
So you grew up in the Bay Area, in Oakland, and you went to 11 schools. What did you see? What do you think is the challenges these schools are facing?
I think they're facing a bunch of different ones. I think that around what the priorities are. So for instance, a lot of people like to talk about Kentucky in a bad way. I used to live in this place called Paducah, Kentucky, but they were so adamant about reading, like making us do reading competitions and reading out loud, things like that.
He's got it. He's got it. This is so key. This is key. I've been talking about this for years, like reading competition is so important.
So when I got to my school in Oakland, I had this really thick Kentucky accent. It was very thick, hard to understand. But it almost resulted in me being put in special education. And so I got lucky because on Thursdays was read out loud day. And it came my turn to read. And I stood up and read, and I was the best reader in the class. So in that moment, I went from being earmarked to go to a special education class to then being a part of the GATE program, the Gifted and Talented program. And that's flip it, man. Like that is so irresponsible. But that was just the luck of the draw. So,
but that's because your teacher was probably not familiar with Southern accents. And there's a lot of people who think that people with Southern accents are dumb. I've heard like people in California say, oh, they just sound so dumb. I'm like, yes. And that's why they always get over on you. And that's why they always scam you and con you and do well, because they understand that people think they're slow. Hence this guy. No, I have family from the South with thick accents and they're brilliant. They know how to code switch. They just turn off their accent when they need to. And I'm sure he knows how to do it too.
Something that these schools are missing is a level of stability where you can also like have the amount of rigor and scrutiny that is, required if you're educating the masses. I think that when you go to a poor school and a poor community, I don't think there is a high level of academic accountability and rigor. And
he's 100% correct. From kindergarten up. Now, the issue is, and you guys know I've talked about this, like I've taught middle school, right? And by the time you get to middle school, trying to be rigorous on somebody who reads at the second grade level is futile. But if we had a level of rigor at kindergarten and first grade and second grade that other schools have, then this would not be an issue. So he's 100% correct here.
And that's part of the thing we're going to talk about today, which is inflated grades. I graduated with a 3.83 something high. I graduated really, really well. I had A's and B's and AP English classes, but then I was in remedial English when I went to university. The same with math. And I think that that's a problem. And so what I try to do is I'll always push the system, brother, always. But I tell parents and students that you have to have enough knowledge on your end to push them and get what you need. So when you get that report card and that report card says an A, and you're a parent, say, thank you, I'm glad the kid got an A. Is my child proficient? Are they reading on grade level? And if they're not, what's the plan to get them on grade level? What do I need to be doing outside of this classroom? How do we work together? So
you went through this experience. You had a really good GPA, and then you went to college. You realized your level of reading and math is not adequate compared to the GPA you had. Do you think this is common nowadays in Oakland schools?
I think it's common all throughout the country, but absolutely.
It is, because when I went to college, and this guy's much younger than I am, when I went to college, I was writing essays for the basketball players in California because they didn't know how to write essays. And even people who came to the university that I went to, and they were not athletes, they couldn't handle the rigor of the university. They struggled because they just weren't ready for the academic challenge. And that's because they got in on their grades, and rightfully so, right? That's a system that we use. They got in on their grades, but then couldn't handle it.
It's common because there are societal pressures that get put on schools, and Oakland's one of them. I think the Office of Civil Rights had to come in one time because of suspensions. And so what then happens is, well, schools will stop suspending. They'll do in-school suspension, right? The numbers will look different. I think that when you talk about how poorly Black kids or brown kids are performing as far as graduation is concerned, then grades get inflated sometimes and you graduate more young people, but the proficiency with them being able to go to college and thrive in college isn't always there. I do think that people are trying hard. I've worked in the district. I know a lot of those people. I know a lot of educators that give it their all every single day. And yet and still, we are still very, very far behind. I don't blame students. I don't blame parents per se. I think that we spend a lot of time on blame instead of just like, what is the issue? But if that many young people, if 2 or 3 out of 10 young Black kids are reading on grade level, we have a problem. We have a serious issue. And that conversation needs to be had, not for political gain, not for clout, not to put adults in better positions, but how do we actually solve this type of issue? Because here's the thing. If I didn't graduate from high school, if I didn't get into college, if I didn't graduate from college and, fall into becoming a doctor, whatever the case is, I know that my life would have turned out very different. There are absolutely more men in my family that have been to jail than have been to college. That's just a fact of my life and of my family. I visited my own mom and dad in jail, and God bless, they're doing great now. They got clean when I was in middle school. But not to belabor the point, I think if their education would have been different, I think if their economic opportunities as a result of that education would have been different, I don't think I would have had to visit both of my parents in jail and live in and out of shelters and systems and things like that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we like to do, and people like to, there's this new trend of education doesn't matter, reading doesn't matter, just be a social media star. And the point is that that's not true. If you're living on the ground, you know that that's not accurate. You do need economic opportunities. You need educational opportunities so that you have options. When you feel like you have options, you make better decisions. When you know what your options are, you make better decisions.
Our report shows if schools in Oakland continue improving at the rate that they're improving at, it's going to take 4 generations for kids to be at grade level. Wow. Unacceptable.
Why are so many people leaving California? It wasn't long ago. People from how you got into the education
system.
system.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a child of Oakland. I've lived in Oakland since I was 7 years old. I went to public schools in my neighborhood, and I was a really good student up until I made the big transition to high school. And I got very distracted. I fell in with a different crowd, and I just stopped going to school. I would be out in the streets, hanging out, and really unfocused on my schoolwork. And I also had teachers who I just remember just not being very supportive or encouraging. And so I just kind of felt like they had a bad attitude. I had a bad attitude. So I would just do whatever I felt like doing. No one really noticed. Nobody called home that year. So basically my grades went from A's to D's, and I was failing all my classes by the end of 10th grade. So at that time, I made the decision to drop out of high school. And instead of finishing and graduating with my peers, going to prom, I went to work. And I went out and worked for a couple years, and I realized I couldn't get ahead. I really needed to go to college. But when I started going to community college, when I was finally ready and I had the mindset to go to school, I was so behind academically. I didn't know how to write an essay. I didn't know how to do, entry-level college math. So I had to remediate, and it was very, very difficult, those years I spent at community college. So that experience showed me we've got to give kids only have one chance at a public education, right? And a great education. And we've got to catch them the first time, that they're in the system. And I got into education because I don't want to see kids like me who are bright, full of potential, but nobody notices when they're checked out of school. We have to have schools that really take responsibility and partner with every kid and every family to make sure that they're successful.
Do you think the schools now are worse than when you were attending, or is it the same?
When I started teaching, schools were kind of like big factories. In the low-income neighborhoods, there was year-round schools. You didn't have your own classroom. Teachers shared classroom because there was so much overcrowding. This was a terrible situation. And Oakland actually addressed that. Parents got really angry and organized, and Oakland started opening charter schools, but also they had their autonomous schools that they opened within the district to really be alternatives to those very, very low-performing schools where kids were not getting a good education and teachers were not having a good experience either. So some of those things are better, I would say, right? Because there was some bold leadership and courageous leadership, and we stuck with.
Long story short, no. Long story short, really nothing's improving.
We focused right on that change initiative for several years and really saw some great outcomes. But then I think some things are worse. There's a lot more absenteeism among students, since the pandemic. Kids weren't coming to school. That was very detrimental to a lot of the students, to not be around their peers, to not be in a classroom. So many kindergartners trying to read on a Zoom lesson. It was very bad for kids.
And now, in terms of the funding,
sure,
I've always been puzzled because the funding amount we are spending in California is almost $23,000, a little bit more than $23,000 per kid per year, which used to be $10,000 like 10 years ago or 12 years ago per kid per year. So we have invested a lot more in the public education. What's going on with the funding? Where does it go?
Part of what California is doing right now is really embracing a community schools model where it's not just the academic needs that are attended to in the school, right? There's social emotional supports, there's mental health supports, there's even health clinics in our schools.
And this is exactly the problem. I know people are going to disagree with me, but there are some things that schools are not supposed to be addressing. And I think this is the problem. You can then take that money and keep the money and put it in education, like reading, writing, math, right? And then get money and put it somewhere else for mental health services. Because what I'm seeing happening a lot, you guys, is that we're so focused on let's do mental health. The reason why these kids are having issues, y'all, is because school is hard. Nobody's supporting them and they can't succeed. Imagine what would happen if they actually got some confidence from doing well in the classroom. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about it because it's not sexy. It doesn't allow people to live in their, I hate to say this, white savior where they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just supporting these Black kids in Oakland and I'm just doing this. It doesn't support that. But the reality is that when kids are doing better in school, they have more confidence. They feel good about themselves. They want to come to school. And so what they're doing, you guys, is using a lot of this mental health services and wellness services to escape schoolwork, to stop going to school. And I don't think there's some things that are not the school's problem. And as a society, we have to get out of this mindset that the government is going to fix all of our problems. The school's job is to educate. If we want to make wellness programs and community programs, put that somewhere else and offer that to kids after school. But they need to spend that money on schools in schools.
There's a great new model of linked learning where kids are getting career internships when they're in high school. They're doing work-based learning.
While we're having the issue with proficiency, while we're not doing the basics.
Correct.
Can you show us where funding is misused?
The way funding works in California is there's always attempts to make the funding go to the things that really matter. One challenge I would say in Oakland is for the number of students we have in our city, we have 120 public schools, district and charter. We have a huge number of public schools. To have a robust and thriving school, you've got to have enough students to generate the kind of budget where you can have a really great program. You can have instructional coaches for your teachers. You can have a great after school program. You can have planning time for teachers, all these things that help put the conditions in place for your teachers to be successful and your students to also excel. But in schools where we have very few students and we choose to keep those schools open, they're not able to provide a robust program. It's kind of like the bare bones, the skeleton. And we end up supplementing, right, from the general fund to keep those schools open. This is at a huge cost to our kids. When every year that we have schools where where the vast majority, 80-90% of the kids are not reading at grade level, 50% of the kids aren't reading at grade level, there's such a cost that's borne by every student in that school and every family in that school. What we're saying is, we probably need a different structure for our schools, to not have all these tiny, tiny schools that are just barely kind of getting the doors open every day and not having the kind of robust supports and programs that really make a school vibrant and successful.
Absolutely. And having 120 schools in a school district is crazy because you can't even manage. I was in a massive school district, and then I was in a school district that was very small. And the difference is that there's too many, not honestly, bureaucrats. Like there's too many people at the top and not enough people on the ground level. And you need that many people at the top when you have that many schools. And so it just doesn't work out for funding. It doesn't work out for the students. They're absolutely going to have to condense some of their schools and close some of their schools and put kids in a place, make sure they're in a place where they can actually get the support that they need from their teachers, from instructional coaches, and things like that. So she's 100% correct on this.
And the cost for these schools are really high, right?
It can be very high. It can be up to $60,000 plus that is spent per student at those schools.
Wow.
Yeah. So if we have less schools, it means to me, we can invest more in those schools, right? And we can really make them vibrant hubs where the community and parents really want to send their kids. But when we're just kind of keeping the status quo of having a lot of schools, I always just think, who's that for? Is that better for students? Right? And it's not.
Do you have any other thoughts for our audience?
I think the thought I would like to leave our audience with is our organization, Families in Action for Quality Education, we believe part of the reason we have such inequitable results, we have such big gaps between our different groups of students, is because underserved families have been left out of the conversation. So I challenge everyone to think about, how is it that we're making a place for, how are we inviting the families, Black families, brown families, low-income families, into the conversation about what they want for their kids, and how our schools can deliver on that.
Kimmy, you say they're left out, but there's a lot of talk about them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
All the messaging is about how the schools are going to help the low-income families and Black and brown kids. Is it just talk? Is it not really happening?
There's a fundamental tension and disconnect where I hear so many of these progressive values stated all the time about how people are, pro-Black, pro-immigrant, they're embracing, they want everyone to succeed, but our actions as leaders need to line up to that.
Yeah, because they don't. It just sounds good on paper. And I've said this before, it just sounds good on paper. It sounds, they get their little check mark, they get their little morality check box that says, I'm so progressive and I care about kids. And then they go home to their families at night and they don't care. And I think this is where, we had an advocate. When I was growing up, we actually had a Black woman who was an advocate for us. And my mom said to me recently, her name was Georgiana. Georgiana, walked my mother through how to get through the school system, what they need to be reading, blah, blah, blah. Said, go to the library, read these books. This is how you get funding for this. This is how you ask for funds for this. This is how you pay for this. Put them in summer school, fight for the right for them to be in summer school so they don't lose any skills. And that's what we actually need. We don't need another person at the top, honestly, telling everybody that they love Black and brown kids and that they want them to succeed. We need advocates on the ground. But anyway, it's actually really late, you guys. Thanks for hanging out with me in this live. If you guys have comments below, please leave them in the comment section so I can read them and respond to them. This is one of my favorite topics. Love talking about education because I think there's so much that we can do that we just pretend like we can't as a society. But anyway, leave comments below and I will get back to you guys. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.